The day had started like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek. The Thompson family, Mark, his wife Sarah, and their two kids, Emily and Jake, were going about their usual Saturday routine. The kids were playing outside, running around the front yard, while Sarah worked on her flower beds. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that hinted at winter, but still carried the warmth of falling leaves. Nobody expected that the day would bring them a story that would capture not just their lives, but eventually the hearts of millions. It was Emily who first noticed the sound. A faint whimper, so soft that it could have been mistaken for the wind squeaking through the fence. She froze mid-step, head tilted. Then it came again, a tiny, broken cry. "Mom," Emily called her, eyes scanning the bushes near the porch. "I think something's in there." Sarah pulled off her gardening gloves, wiping dirt onto her jeans, and walked over. The whimper grew louder as she bent down and gently pushed the leaves aside. There, huddled in the shadows, was a tiny puppy. Its fur was dirty, matted with twigs, and its body shivered so violently that its ribs seemed ready to snap. Its eyes, big, brown, and terrified, stared up at her. "Oh, you poor thing," Sarah whispered. She reached out a cautious hand, but the puppy didn't run. Instead, it gave a weak wag of its tail, as though it had used up the last of its strength just to say, "Help me." Mark came over when he heard Sarah's voice soften into that tone he knew too well, the one she used when she'd already decided their lives were about to change. "What's going on?" he asked, though he already saw it. "It's a puppy," Sarah said simply, cradling the fragile body in her arms. "Someone must have abandoned it." The kids gasped with delight, immediately crowding around to get a closer look. Jake, the younger one, reached out to pet it, but Sarah pulled back gently. "Careful, honey. It's very weak. We need to get it some water and food." Mark sighed. He had grown up with pets and knew what was coming. Bringing a stray inside was always a gamble disease. Fleas, unpredictable behavior, but one look at the trembling creature in Sarah's arms, and he knew resistance was pointless. The puppy had already found its family dot inside. The Thompsons quickly prepared a small box lined with an old blanket. The puppy curled into the warmth, letting out a soft sigh of relief. The kids hovered nearby, whispering to each other as though afraid to scare it. For the first time since they had found it, the little dog closed its eyes and drifted into a fragile sleep. But the Thompsons weren't the only ones watching. From the corner of the living room, 3 pairs of sharp green eyes glared at the new arrival. Whiskers twitched, tails flicked, and low growls rumbled in warning. The Thompsons' cats Luna, Shadow, and Oliver were the undisputed rulers of the household. Each had a distinct personality. Luna was sleek and aloof. Shadow was playful, but fiercely territorial, and Oliver, the eldest, carried himself like a king. Together, they formed a coalition that brooked no outsider's dot, and now, in their domain, lay a stranger. Worse, a dog. The first encounter was tense. As Sarah set the box on the floor, Luna crept closer, ears back, and hissed. The puppy stirred, lifting its head weakly. But instead of barking or growling, it blinked, wagged its tiny tail once, and collapsed again. Shadow pounced forward, sniffing curiously, while Oliver maintained his regal distance, watching like a disapproving judge. To everyone's surprise, none of the cats attacked. They circled the box, grumbling, but the puppy's frailty seemed to disarm them. It wasn't a threat, not yet. That night, the Thompsons debated what to do. "We can't just keep it," Mark argued half-heartedly. "It might belong to someone." "Look at him," Sarah countered, nodding toward the box where the puppy lay. "He's skin and bones. Nobody's been taking care of him. If he had an owner, they abandoned him?" The kids chimed in, pleading, "Please, Dad. We'll help. Take care of him, please." Mark rubbed his temples, But deep down he knew the truth. The moment Sarah picked up that puppy, their lives had changed. "Fine," he said at last. "But he's your responsibility, too." Excited cheers erupted, waking the puppy briefly. It lifted its head, looking around the room. For a fleeting moment, its eyes met the cat's. 3 predators and 1 fragile pup. Nobody could have guessed what that moment would mean for the future Dot. As the days passed, the puppy slowly grew stronger. With nutritious food, clean water, and constant care, it regained some energy. Its fur, once dirty and dull, began to shine faintly. It still trembled, but not from cold now. It was with excitement when the kids came to play Dot. And yet, despite the children's constant affection, the puppy didn't follow them the way most dogs did. It wasn't drawn to toys thrown across the room. It didn't whine for attention or bark when it wanted something. Instead, it shadowed the cats. Wherever the cats went, the puppy toddled behind. When they climbed onto the couch, it tried to scramble up too. When they lounged in the patch of sunlight by the window, the puppy wriggled between them, pressing its tiny body against their fur. The cats hissed at first, but after several failed attempts to push it away, they gave up. One evening, Sarah walked into the living room to find all 3 cats curled in their usual circle on the couch. But this time, right in the middle, snuggled tight, was the puppy. Its head rested on Oliver's tail, while its paws touched Shadow's flank. Luna, the most aloof of all, had allowed its back to press against hers. Sarah gasped softly. "Mark," she whispered, waving him over. Mark chuckled. "Well, I'll be damned. He thinks he's one of them." It was more than just mimicry. The puppy was learning from the cats. When they stretched, it stretched. When they groomed themselves, it licked its paws and rubbed at its face clumsily. It didn't growl or bark it, only made soft, strange little sounds, as though trying to meow. The Thompsons were stunned, but they didn't interfere. They watched as the fragile puppy found comfort not in humans, but in the unlikely embrace of 3 creatures who should have rejected him. From that moment on, the puppy wasn't just surviving. He was transforming Dot, and though nobody could have known it then, this strange beginning would grow into a story so extraordinary, it would eventually leave the world speechless. The first few days in the Thompson household were filled with uncertainty. The puppy, though safe and fed, still seemed fragile, as if the world could break him with a single harsh breeze. He slept often, nestled in his blanket, but whenever he stirred, his eyes instinctively sought out the cats. It was as if something in him believed they held the key to survival. At first, the cats tolerated his presence with visible reluctance. Oliver, the eldest, regarded him from a distance, his amber eyes narrowed with suspicion. Shadow, the playful one, darted close from time to time, sniffing before retreating. Luna, the aloof queen of the trio, made her disapproval clear with a sharp hiss whenever the puppy stumbled too near. Yet despite the tension, something remarkable was unfolding. The puppy, instead of attaching himself to the humans who fed him, seemed utterly fixated on the cats. When Sarah called him with a gentle whistle, he barely lifted his head. But when Oliver yawned and stretched luxuriously across the carpet, the puppy clumsily copied the motion, pushing his front paws forward and arching his tiny back. The imitation was imperfect, but the intent was clear. He wasn't trying to be a dog at all. He was trying to be one of them. The Thompsons couldn't help but notice. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, they watched the strange dynamic with growing amusement. The cats lounged on the couch as always, tails flicking lazily. The puppy, too small to climb up, sat directly beneath them, gazing up as if waiting for permission. "Do you think he knows he's a dog?" Jake asked, his young voice full of wonder. Sarah smiled faintly. "I don't think he cares what he is. He just wants to belong." Belonging, it was the very thing the puppy had been denied before fate led him to their porch. And now, in the warmth of the Thompson home, He was determined to carve out his place, even if it meant becoming something he wasn't born to be. The first breakthrough came one quiet afternoon. The puppy had been napping in his box when Luna leapt gracefully from the armrest to the window ledge, her favorite sunspot. The sudden movement stirred him, and within moments, he scrambled out of his blanket and toddled across the floor. His legs were unsteady, but his determination was unshakable. He sat at the base of the window, staring up, whining softly. Luna ignored him at first, tail flicking with annoyance. But the puppy refused to leave. He pawed at the wooden frame, attempting to climb. Of course, his little body wasn't built for such feats. Not yet, but the effort was endearing. Finally, Luna gave a long-suffering sigh, leapt down beside him, and walked away with a swish of her tail. To everyone's astonishment, the puppy brightened, as though her acknowledgement alone had been a reward. He followed her faithfully until she settled back on the couch. And then, without hesitation, he curled up against her side and closed his eyes. Sarah gasped softly. "Look at that." She let him. It was a small gesture, but it marked the beginning of something extraordinary. From that day on, the puppy began to insert himself into every part of the cats' lives. At mealtimes, he waited patiently with them by the kitchen counter, even though his bowl was separate. Unlike other dogs who bark or whine when hungry, he sat silently, mirroring the cat's quiet composure. When they played with dangling strings or toy mice, he leapt awkwardly into the fray, batting at the toys with his paws instead of grabbing them with his mouth. The family laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks, watching their puppy swat at a ball of yarn like a clumsy kitten. But the most astonishing change was his vocalization. Instead of barking, something he had rarely done since his arrival, he began producing strange little sounds. High-pitched whines, almost melodic, rose from his throat whenever the cats meowed. It wasn't a perfect imitation, but it was close enough to make the Thompsons stare in disbelief. "He's trying to talk to them," Emily whispered one evening. And in a way, he was. The cats didn't seem impressed, but they didn't reject him either. Over time, they grew accustomed to his presence. Shadow began playing chase with him across the living room, darting under tables while the puppy tumbled after, his tail wagging furiously. Oliver, dignified as always, allowed the puppy to share his favorite rug, even tolerating the pup's habit of resting his head on Oliver's belly. Luna remained aloof, but even she stopped hissing when the puppy nestled beside her on cold nights. For the Thompsons, it was like watching a miracle unfold. Their home had always been lively, but now it was filled with an energy unlike anything they had ever known. The children woke each morning, eager to see what new trick the puppy would copy from his feline siblings. Mark, who had been skeptical about keeping him, found himself sneaking treats and scratching the puppy's ears when no one was looking. Yet, what struck Sarah most was the puppy's patience. Unlike other dogs his age, who were often rambunctious and demanding, he carried himself with a calmness that seemed borrowed from the cats. He didn't rush, didn't push, didn't demand attention. Instead, he observed, imitated, and waited. It was as if he understood that acceptance couldn't be forced, it had to be earned. And slowly, he was earning it. One rainy evening, the family gathered to watch a movie. The cats, as always, claimed the couch. The puppy trotted in, eyed the space, and attempted the impossible. He jumped. His body flailed mid-air, and he landed awkwardly, halfway onto the cushion. For a tense moment, everyone held their breath, expecting the cats to scatter. But instead, Oliver shifted slightly, giving the puppy space to scramble the rest of the way up. Once settled, the pup curled into a tight ball between Oliver and Shadow. Luna, perched on the backrest, looked down at the scene with narrowed eyes but didn't move. The room fell into a stunned silence before Sarah whispered, "Well, there it is. He's one of them now." From that night on, the couch became their shared throne. The puppy's bond with the cats deepened each day. He followed them not just out of need, but out of loyalty. To him, they weren't just companions. They were mentors, guides, family. The Thompsons watched in awe as their little stray transformed before their eyes, not into the dog they expected, but into something far more extraordinary. A creature caught between two worlds, perfectly at home in both. And though the family didn't realize it then, this unlikely friendship was only the beginning of a story that would soon capture hearts far beyond their living room. By the third week in the Thompson household, it was undeniable. The puppy was no ordinary dog. He wasn't just living alongside cats. He was becoming one. The transformation was gradual, almost invisible in the beginning. But with each passing day, his behavior drifted further from what anyone would expect of a young pup. The Thompsons had named him Max, though sometimes it felt as though the name didn't quite fit. Max didn't act like a Max. No barking at the mailman, no chewing on shoes, no chasing after thrown balls. Instead, he seemed to live by a different code, one not written for dogs at all. The first sign came during mealtimes. Mark had expected Max to be impatient, maybe even a little pushy. Every dog he'd known in his life practically danced at the sight of food. But Max was different. When Sarah poured kibble into his bowl, he didn't charge forward or whine. Instead, he waited. He would sit quietly until Oliver, Shadow, and Luna had approached their dishes. Only after the cats had started eating would Max move toward his own food. It's like he's watching them for permission, Sarah marveled one morning. Emily giggled. Or maybe he thinks he is a cat, and that's just the rule. Mark shook his head, though he couldn't hide his smile. Well, least he's polite. Can't complain about that. But it didn't stop with mealtime. Ducks began copying their movements in ways that left the family in disbelief. When the cats stretched after a nap, arching their spines and extending their paws, Max did the same. At first, the motion was clumsy. His back didn't bend the way theirs did, but over time, he got better, until his stretches were nearly identical. He groomed himself too. Not like a dog licking his paw absent-mindedly, but in a deliberate, feline way. He'd lick one paw, then rub it awkwardly across his face, trying to imitate the smooth swipes of Luna's grooming routine. Sometimes he toppled over in the process, earning amused flicks of tails from his mentors. But he always tried again. The most shocking imitation came one evening when the family was relaxing in the living room. Shadow let out a loud meow, calling to the others. Almost instantly, Max opened his mouth and produced a strange sound. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't even a whine. It was a high-pitched, awkward meow, halfway between a squeak and a meow. The room erupted with laughter. Did he just try to meow? Jake shouted, clutching his sides. Sarah covered her mouth in astonishment. Oh my goodness. He's actually learning their language. From that moment on, Max practiced. Whenever the cats vocalized, he followed with his own garbled attempt. The Thompsons grew used to hearing his peculiar dog meow echoing through the house. The cats, for their part, didn't seem impressed, but they also didn't shun him. If anything, they tolerated his clumsy efforts, which was more acceptance than Max could have asked for. But Max's training didn't end there. He studied the cats constantly, mimicking their behavior with growing accuracy. When Luna leapt gracefully onto the windowsill, Max would scramble to climb after her. At first, his attempts ended in disaster. He'd topple backward, limbs flailing, landing in an undignified heap. But he never gave up. Slowly, his jumps grew higher, his landings steadier. Eventually, he managed to pull himself onto the couch in a single bound, earning a rare approving glance from Oliver. By then, the family had stopped trying to redirect him. At first, Sarah had worried that Max was missing out on normal dog things like fetch, tug of war, or learning basic commands. But the more she watched him, the more she realized he was thriving in his own unusual way. "He's happy," she said one night, watching Max and Shadowbat at the same toy mouse. "Who cares if he thinks he's a cat?" Mark chuckled. "I just never thought I'd see the day a dog tried to climb curtains." Because yes, Max tried that too. One morning, the family walked in to find him halfway up the drapes, his claws digging in for dear life as he attempted to follow Luna. He didn't make it far before slipping, but the sheer determination in his eyes left everyone speechless. The kids were thrilled by every new antic. Emily began keeping a journal, documenting Max's cat lessons. She wrote entries like, "Day 12. Max tried to wash his ears like Luna. Fell over twice, but got back up. Day 15. Max crouched in the grass outside, just like Shadow. He pounced at a leaf. He missed, but it was adorable. Day 18. Max made his best meow yet. Sounded like a squeaky door, but we understood him. Jake, meanwhile, began telling his friends at school that his dog was secretly a cat. At first, nobody believed him until he showed them videos. Soon, those videos spread beyond the school, reaching neighbors, relatives, and eventually strangers online. The Thompsons hadn't planned on turning Max into a star, but his antics were too remarkable not to share. Still, the most meaningful part of Max's transformation wasn't how the world saw him. It was how the cats saw him. Oliver, once cold and distant, began grooming Max occasionally, licking his ears with slow, deliberate strokes. Luna, the aloof queen, stopped moving away when Max curled beside her in the sunlight. Shadow treated him like a playmate, darting through hallways with Max hot on his tail. For the first time in his life, Max wasn't just tolerated. He was included. And Max, for his part, adored them in return. He shadowed them wherever they went, his tail wagging, his eyes bright with admiration. If the cats sat by the window to watch birds, Max sat too, crouched low, ears perked, as if he understood the game. If they chased shadows in the evening light, Max leapt with them, clumsy but enthusiastic. The Thompsons often found themselves pausing in awe. It wasn't just mimicry anymore, it was identity. One rainy evening, Sarah curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, watching Max and the cats sprawled together. The sight moved her more than she expected. "You know," she murmured to Mark, "he's not pretending anymore. In his mind, he is a cat." Mark smiled softly, watching their dog stretch and curl his paws like his feline siblings. "And maybe that's okay," he said. "If he's happy, then who are we to tell him otherwise?" Outside, the rain pattered against the windows, and inside, Max purred, or at least tried to. The sound was a low, rumbling growl, awkward but filled with intent. Shadow responded with a real purr, and for the first time, it seemed as though Max's efforts had finally bridged the gap. The puppy who had once been abandoned, trembling and alone, had found not just a family, but an identity one shaped not by what he was supposed to be, but by who he chose to love. And though the Thompsons couldn't know it then, Max's cat-like ways would soon make him a sensation far beyond their little town. By now, the Thompsons had accepted that their puppy wasn't just a little different. He was a dog who had truly chosen the path of a cat. The family adored his quirks. The cats tolerated and even embraced him. And life inside the Thompson home felt like a cozy balance of chaos and harmony. But the world outside had yet to meet Max. That changed one bright Saturday morning, when Sarah decided it was time to introduce him to the backyard. Until then, Max had mostly stayed indoors, growing strong under the watchful eyes of his feline siblings. He was healthier now, bigger, though still young. His fur gleamed in the sunlight, and his once frail legs were sturdy with energy. Sarah clipped on a tiny collar and leash, ready to see how he'd handle the outside world. The cats, of course, weren't about to miss out. The moment Sarah opened the back door, all three padded out with the confidence of rulers surveying their kingdom. Max predictably followed. His nose twitched at the scent of grass and dirt, but he didn't bound around like most dogs would. Instead, he crouched low beside the cats, scanning the yard with sharp, deliberate focus. Emily and Jake raced to join them, eagling as they watched the scene unfold. "Look at him," Jake whispered. "He's doing it again." And indeed, Max was imitating the cats perfectly. While Shadow crouched behind a bush, tail flicking in preparation for a playful pounce, Max crouched beside him, his ears perked. When Luna froze, eyes locked on a bird perched on the fence, Max froze too, his muscles taut with anticipation. But here was the strangest part. Max didn't bark. Not once. Every neighbor's dog barked at birds, squirrels, or even just the wind. Yet Max sat in silence, side by side with his feline siblings, as though waiting for the perfect moment to spring Mrs. Henderson. The Thompsons' next-door neighbor happened to be watering her garden that morning. She paused mid-spray when she spotted the group across the fence. "Sarah?" she called. "Why is your puppy crouching like that?" Sarah laughed awkwardly. "Oh, that's just Max. He, thinks he's a cat." Mrs. Henderson peered closer, her eyebrows shooting up as she watched the little dog bat at a drifting leaf with his paw, instead of chasing it with his mouth. "Well, I'll be darned," she muttered. "That's the strangest thing I've ever seen." Word spread quickly after that. Neighbors began stopping by, curious to see the dog-cat. They'd stand at the fence, chuckling as Max followed the cats around the yard, climbing onto low garden walls, swiping at toys, or sitting completely still in the grass, eyes fixed on invisible prey. "Does he ever bark?" one neighbor asked. "Not really," Mark admitted with a grin. "He prefers whatever that noise is." As if on cue, Max let out one of his signature squeaky rows, making the crowd laugh. It wasn't long before someone suggested filming him. Emily had already been documenting his antics in her journal, but now she and Jake began recording short clips on their mom's phone. The first video they posted showed Max crouched beside Shadow, both staring intently at a butterfly. Shadow pounced first, missing by inches, while Max followed clumsily, landing in a heap but wagging his tail proudly. The video spread faster than the Thompsons imagined. Within days, it had thousands of views. Within weeks, millions. Comments poured in from people around the world. "This is the cutest thing I've ever seen. A dog raised as a cat. Proof that family isn't about species. It's about love. I would die for Max. Protect him at all costs." The Thompsons were stunned. Their quirky household had gone viral. Local news stations reached out, asking to feature the story. Reporters showed up at their front door with cameras, eager to capture footage of Max and his feline mentors. At first, Sarah hesitated. She worried the attention might overwhelm the animals. But the cats, ever unbothered, carried on as though the world wasn't watching. Max, too, seemed oblivious. As long as he had his siblings beside him, he was content. During one interview, the reporter asked a simple question. "Why do you think Max acts this way?" Sarah smiled thoughtfully. "I think when he came to us, he was so weak, so alone. The cats didn't push him away, and he learned from them because he wanted to belong. He doesn't know he's supposed to be a dog. He just knows he's loved." That line struck a chord. Clips of the interview were shared across platforms, touching hearts everywhere. People saw in Max's story a reflection of something deeper, an idea that belonging could transcend boundaries, that love could reshape identity. But not everyone understood. Some dog trainers criticized the Thompsons, claiming Max might grow up confused or socially stunted. "He needs to be around dogs," one warned. "Otherwise, he won't learn proper behavior." Mark considered their words but ultimately shrugged them off. "He's happy, he said firmly. That's all that matters. And indeed, Max seemed more than happy. He seemed fulfilled. One evening, as the family sat on the porch, neighbors gathered again to watch. A squirrel darted across the yard, and every instinct said Max should bark and give chase. Instead, he crouched low, tail swishing, eyes gleaming. The cats mirrored his posture, and together they formed a united hunting party, silent, patient, and deadly serious. The squirrel escaped unharmed, of course, but the scene left the crowd roaring with laughter. Your dog is broken, one neighbor teased. Not broken, Sarah corrected, smiling proudly. Just different. The kids beamed, thrilled that their unusual pet had become a neighborhood celebrity. Emily even started a social media page for Max, calling it Max the Cat Dog. Within weeks, it had hundreds of thousands of followers. People began sending fan art, photos of their own pets, calling a Max, and heartfelt messages about how the little dog's story had brought them joy. Some shared stories of their own rescued animals, finding inspiration in Max's resilience and acceptance. The Thompsons hadn't expected any of this. All they'd done was taken a frightened, abandoned puppy. Yet here he was, uniting people, making strangers smile, and proving that even the strangest beginnings could lead to something extraordinary. Still, fame or not, Max remained unchanged. Each night, he curled up with his cats, purring, or at least trying to, and drifted to sleep surrounded by the only family he'd ever known. For the Thompsons, it was humbling. Their home was no longer just theirs. It was a stage for a story the world had fallen in love with. But to Max, none of that mattered. He wasn't trying to be famous. He wasn't even trying to be extraordinary. He was simply trying to be a cat. And in the eyes of the Thompsons, their neighbors, and the millions watching online, that was more than enough. By the time Max was nearly a year old, he was no longer the tiny, fragile puppy the Thompsons had rescued from the roadside. His legs had stretched tall, his chest had broadened, and his bark, though rarely heard, was deep and startling when it slipped out. But despite his size, his habits hadn't changed. Max still curled up in a tight ball at the end of the couch, wedging himself between Luna and Shadow, even if his body spilled halfway off the cushions. He still batted toys with his paws instead of chewing them. And he still crouched in the grass, tail flicking like a hunter, as though he were a cat plotting his next pounce. At first, the family found it endearing. But soon, they began to notice the cracks in his double life. One evening, Sarah entered the living room to find Max halfway up the cat tower. It wasn't unusual for him to climb, but now, at nearly 50 pounds, the furniture groaned beneath him. The top platform wobbled dangerously as he scrambled for balance. "Max!" Sarah cried. "Get down before you break it." The cats scattered, offended by the commotion, while Max leapt clumsily to the floor. His tail wagged, clearly proud of himself, but the base of the cat tower cracked where it hit the ground. "See what I mean?" Mark said later, shaking his head. "He's not a little kitten anymore. He's a full-grown dog, pretending he can still be one." But it wasn't just the furniture. Max's instincts were beginning to stir in ways that confused him. On a walk through the park, Sarah noticed him tense at the sight of another dog. His hackles rose, his tail stiffened. For a moment, he looked every bit the shepherd mix. He was alert, powerful, and ready. Then, just as quickly, he dropped into a crouch, imitating the cats, swiping one paw across the dirt, as if unsure how to approach. The other dog barked, tail wagging, eager to play. Max froze, bewildered. "That's not normal," a man at the park remarked. Sarah forced a laugh. "He's still figuring himself out." But inside, she worried. Emily and Jake noticed it too. "Mom," Jake whispered one night, "do you think Max even knows he's a dog?" The question hung heavy in the room. Did he? The Thompsons decided to test the waters by bringing Max to a dog park. Maybe, they thought, exposure to other dogs would awaken something in him, a sense of belonging with his own kind. The first trip was a disaster. From the moment they arrived, Max looked overwhelmed. Dozens of dogs raced and barked, chasing balls and tumbling together in joyful chaos. Max pressed against Sarah's leg, wide-eyed, his tail tucked low. "It's okay, buddy," Sarah whispered, kneeling to comfort him. "Go play." But Max didn't move. A golden retriever bounded up, tail wagging, nudging Max playfully. Instead of responding in kind, Max swatted gently with his paw, just as he would with his feline siblings. The retriever barked in confusion before running off. A husky tried next, bowing low in invitation. Max tilted his head, then sat primly, tail flicking once in mimicry of Luna. The husky gave up too. Within minutes, Max had isolated himself, sitting quietly at the edge of the park like an outsider. His ears twitched at every bark, but he never joined the games. "He doesn't fit in," Jake said softly, watching through the fence. Mark sighed. "He thinks he's a cat. Dogs don't make sense to him." The family left early, hearts heavy. For the first time, they questioned whether Max's unusual upbringing had done him more harm than good. Back at home, though, Max was a different animal. As soon as the cats padded into the living room, he lit up, bounding after them with joy. He crouched beside Shadow, swatted playfully at Luna's tail, and curled against Whiskers, as though nothing in the world was wrong. "He's happy here," Emily said firmly. "So what if he's not like other dogs?" But Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging thought. What would happen if Max ever needed to be around other dogs at the vet, on walks or in emergencies? Would his confusion hold him back? A next challenge came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Sarah returned home to find a disaster in the kitchen. The trash can had tipped, scraps scattered across the floor. Standing guiltily in the middle of the mess was Max. At first, Sarah thought it was simple mischief. But then she realized he wasn't eating the scraps. Instead, he pawed at them, burying bits under a rug, pushing others toward a corner, as though storing them. "He's hiding it," Sarah said, baffled. "Just like the cats do with toys," Mark groaned. "What happens when his instincts really kick in? What if he doesn't know what to do with them?" Max's identity crisis became more evident with each passing week. He was too big for cat games, but too confused for dog ones. Neighbors began noticing too. At block parties, when other dogs barked for attention, Max sat quietly beside the cats, swishing his tail in eerie mimicry. "Maybe you should hire a trainer," someone suggested, but the Thompsons hesitated. Would training strip away what made Max unique? Would it force him into a mold that didn't fit? The breaking point came during a summer barbecue. Guests gathered in the backyard, children played tag, and the cats lounged on the porch. Max joined them, crouched low, eyes locked on a fluttering butterfly. He leapt graceful at first, but his large body sent drinks flying, knocking over chairs and sending the crowd into laughter. Max landed awkwardly, bewildered, and wagged his tail as though expecting praise. "Max!" Sarah scolded, rushing to clean up the mess. The puppy-turned dog lowered his head, eyes wide with shame. For the first time, his cat-like antics hadn't been met with amusement, but with frustration. That night, as Max curled up between the cats, Sarah stroked his fur, torn between pride and worry. "He doesn't fit anywhere," she whispered to Mark. "Not with dogs. Not with cats. Where does that leave him?" Mark pulled her close. "It leaves him here with us. He may not fit anywhere else, but he fits in this family. That's enough." And deep down, Sarah hoped he was right. Because Max's identity might have been tangled, confusing, and sometimes messy, but the love that held them together was undeniable. Even if the world saw him as broken, the Thompsons saw him as whole. Summer had settled over the neighborhood, bringing long evenings filled with children's laughter, sprinklers hissing on lawns, and fireflies blinking in the dark. For the Thompsons, life had taken on its usual rhythm. Work, school, and of course, the daily antics of Max and the cats. Despite his growing size and awkwardness, Max remained glued to his feline siblings, his loyalty unshaken. But sometimes, fate has a way of presenting a challenge that reveals who someone truly is. For Max, that test came on an ordinary Tuesday. Emily had been riding her bike down the street when she spotted something near the curb. At first, she thought it was a crumpled paper bag. But as she slowed down, she realized it was moving. Curious, she parked her bike and knelt beside it. It wasn't a bag. It was a tiny kitten. The poor creature was no more than a few weeks old, its fur matted and dirty, its eyes half shut with sickness. It let out a faint, pitiful mew that tugged at Emily's heart. Without hesitation, she scooped it into her arms and pedaled home as quickly as she could. "Mom! Dad!" she shouted, bursting through the door. "Look what I found!" Sarah gasped when she saw the kitten. "Oh, sweetheart. It's so small." Mark fetched a towel, gently wrapping the trembling creature. The kids looked on anxiously as Sarah examined it. "It's weak," she said softly. "We'll need to clean it up and get it to the vet." Amid the commotion, Max padded into the room. He froze when he saw the bundle in Sarah's arms. His ears perked, his tail swished, and he tilted his head curiously. The cats, meanwhile, hissed in protest. They weren't thrilled about a strange kitten invading their territory. Shadow arched his back, Luna darted under the couch, and Whiskers sat at a distance, her tail lashing. But Max didn't hiss. He didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward. "Easy, boy," Mark warned, reaching out as though to stop him. But Max ignored him. He approached slowly, carefully, then sniffed the kitten with surprising gentleness. What happened next stunned everyone. Max lay down beside Sarah, curling his body protectively around the tiny creature. Then, in a move that mirrored how the cats had once treated him, he began to lick the kitten's head, clumsy but careful. The kitten let out a weak mew and burrowed into Max's fur as if it had found safety at last. "Oh my gosh," Emily whispered. He knows what to do." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. In that moment, she realized Max wasn't broken, confused, or lost. He was something more, a bridge between species, carrying the love and care he had received and passing it on. Over the next few days, the family worked tirelessly to nurse the kitten back to health. They fed it warm milk through a syringe, wiped its eyes, and kept it wrapped in blankets. But it was Max who never left its side. When the kitten whimpered in the night, Max pressed close, his warmth soothing it back to sleep. When the syringe came out, Max licked the kitten's chin afterward, cleaning it like a mother cat. He even pushed his food bowl toward the kitten once, as if offering to share. The cats watched from a distance, still skeptical, but they didn't challenge him. It was as though they recognized that Max had taken responsibility. This was his mission. At the vet's office, the doctor was astonished by the bond. "I've seen mother cats taken orphans," she said, smiling, "but I've never seen a dog act like this. He's treating that kitten as his own." The Thompsons couldn't have been prouder. Word spread quickly, especially online. Emily had posted a short video of Max curled around the kitten, licking its head as it purred. The caption read, "Raised as a cat, now raising one of his own." The video exploded. Millions of people shared it, commenting on how love transcends differences. "This dog is more human than most people I know. Max is proof that family is chosen, not born." "I'm crying. This is the sweetest thing ever," reporters returned, eager to capture the story of Max's newest role. But for the Thompsons, it wasn't about fame. It was about witnessing something pure and extraordinary unfolding in their living room. The kitten, whom the kids named Oliver, grew stronger each day. His eyes cleared, his tiny body gained weight, and soon he was darting around the house with bursts of energy. Through it all, Max remained his guardian, patient and steady, always ready to play or cuddle when Oliver tired. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. He was raised by cats, she said one night as Max and Oliver curled together on the rug. Now he's raising one. It's like the circle has completed itself. Mark nodded. Maybe that's his purpose. Maybe he was never meant to just be a dog or a cat. Maybe he was meant to be something in between, someone who understands both. And perhaps that was true. Max's cat-like upbringing had once seemed like a burden, a quirk that set him apart. But now it was a gift. It had taught him compassion, gentleness, and patience beyond what most dogs ever showed. The neighbors noticed too. Children from the block came to watch Max and Oliver play. Adults shook their heads in wonder. That's not just a pet, one said. That's a teacher. For Max, none of it mattered. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't trying to be famous or extraordinary. He was simply doing what felt natural, offering the same love he had once been given when he needed it most. And in that, he revealed the truth the Thompsons had been searching for. Max didn't need to fit neatly into the box of dog or cat. He wasn't broken or confused. He was whole precisely because he had embraced the best of both worlds. In Oliver, he had found not only a friend, but also a mirror of his own journey. A lost, fragile creature, taken in by unlikely companions, growing strong through love. And in Max, the Thompsons had found proof of something deeper, that sometimes being different isn't a weakness. Sometimes it's the very thing that makes you strong enough to change the world around you. By the time autumn rolled in, with its crisp air and fiery leaves tumbling from the maples, the Thompsons' household had changed forever. What had once been a simple family home was now a lively kingdom ruled by 5 creatures. 3 cats, 1 cat-raised dog, and a kitten who had somehow woven himself into all of their hearts. Oliver, the rescued kitten, had grown from a frail scrap of fur into a mischievous ball of energy. His once weak mews had become bold declarations, especially when he wanted attention. And wherever Oliver went, Max followed. It wasn't just guardianship anymore. It was friendship. The two were inseparable, tumbling across the living room in playful wrestling matches, napping curled into the same blanket, and even eating side by side as though the food bowl had always been meant to be shared. What made it even more astonishing was how the older cats had come to accept it. At first, Shadow, Luna, and Whiskers had kept their distance, suspicious of the newcomer. But Max's devotion had softened them. They had once nurtured him when he was small and helpless, and now they watched as he poured that same love into Oliver. It was as if they understood that their odd student had graduated and was now passing on the lessons. One chilly evening, Sarah found them all together on the windowsill. Shadow and Luna flanked one side, Whiskers perched on the other. Max sat proudly in the middle, Oliver nestled against his chest. 5 pairs of eyes gazed out into the night, watching the falling leaves as though the world beyond the glass belonged to them alone. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling. "Look at them," she whispered to Mark. "That's not just pets. That's a family." Mark nodded, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "A family like no other. And soon, the world seemed to agree." Emily continued to update Max's social media page, now rebranded Max and Family. Each post captured the little moments that made life inside the Thompson household so extraordinary. Max grooming Oliver, all 5 animals lined up on the couch, or the kitten swiping at Max's wagging tail, while the dog pretended not to notice. The internet couldn't get enough. Fan pages sprang up. Artists drew cartoons of Max wearing cat ears, with Oliver perched proudly on his back. Teachers used the story in classrooms to spark discussions about kindness and belonging. Even shelters shared the videos, reminding people that love could transform the most unlikely rescues. Max isn't just a pet anymore, Emily announced one evening as she scrolled through the latest comments. He's like an ambassador of love. Jake nodded, serious for once. He's proof that being different makes you special. But for Max, none of the fame mattered. What mattered was his family. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah decided to host a small neighborhood gathering. She wanted to thank everyone for their kindness and truthfully. She also wanted them to see, firsthand, what her home had become. The backyard buzzed with chatter and laughter. Children ran between picnic tables, adults sipped warm cider, and plates of cookies disappeared quickly. But the real show was happening in the yard. Max trotted proudly through the grass, Oliver scampering close behind. The kitten tried to mimic his every move, crouching when Max crouched, leaping when Max leapt. The older cats lounged nearby, tails flicking as they supervised the antics like indulgent uncles and aunts. At one point, Oliver climbed halfway up a tree trunk, claws scrabbling. Max rushed forward, barking once startling everyone with the rare sound. But it wasn't anger. It was urgency. He circled the tree, whining softly, then crouched low, as though coaxing Oliver to jump into his waiting paws. The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers when the kitten leapt and Max caught him. Clumsily but safely. It was a simple act, but it left the neighbors speechless. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had first noticed Max's cat-like ways months ago, wiped her eyes. "That dog," she whispered, "is more of a parent than most people I know." The Thompsons smiled proudly. They had always loved Max, quirks and all, but moments like this reminded them just how extraordinary he really was. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink, the animals gathered together once more. Max lay stretched across the grass, Oliver curled against his side, while Shadow, Luna, and Whiskers settled nearby. The five of them formed a circle of warmth and trust, a living symbol of unity. Guests pulled out their phones, snapping pictures and whispering in awe. But Sarah didn't need the photos. The image was etched into her heart forever. Later that night, after the neighbors had gone home and the kids were in bed, Sarah and Mark sat quietly on the couch. Max and Oliver dozed together at their feet, the cats perched on the backrest above them. "You know," Mark said softly, "I used to worry he'd never fit in, that he'd always be caught between worlds." Sarah smiled. "Maybe that's true, but maybe that's the point. He doesn't fit in one world, he created his own. And in that world, there was no division between dog and cat, between predator and prey, between differences that should have kept them apart. There was only love. The family they had built was unconventional, messy, and sometimes chaotic, but it was also beautiful. And in their little corner of the world, it was enough. The Thompsons didn't need Max to act like other dogs. They didn't need Oliver to grow up like other kittens. They didn't need their home to look like anyone else's, because what they had was rare. They had a family that had chosen each other. And that, Sarah thought as she kissed Max on the head before bed, was more valuable than anything else in the world. The years drifted by gently, like autumn leaves on a quiet breeze. Seasons changed, children grew, and life in the Thompson household kept evolving. But one constant remained: Max, and the family he had built. By the time Emily was preparing for high school, and Jake was nearly grown, Max had begun to show signs of age. His muzzle, once a sleek chestnut, was now peppered with silver. His gait had slowed, though his eyes still shone with the same gentle light that had once captivated the Thompsons. On the day they brought him home, Oliver, the little kitten he had raised, was no longer so little. He had grown into a handsome tomcat, agile and confident. But even as he matured, he never outgrew Max's side. The two were still inseparable, though now it was Oliver who often watched over Max, nudging him gently when he lingered too long on the porch steps, curling against him when the old dog's joints ached in the cold. The older cat's shadow, Luna, and Whiskers had also slowed with time, though they remained dignified overseers of the household. Together, the family had weathered the years, their bond deepening with every shared season. But one winter's afternoon, everything shifted. Emily returned from volunteering at the local animal shelter, her eyes alight with the same fire Sarah had once seen in Max. In her arms, she carried a bundle wrapped in a blanket, a trembling puppy with wide, uncertain eyes. "His name's Charlie," she said softly, setting the pup down in the living room. "He was abandoned. They didn't think he'd make it through the week." Charlie was small, his ribs showing beneath patchy fur, his ears too big for his head. He shivered even in the warmth of the house, staring at the new world with a mix of fear and wonder. Mark frowned. We already have our hands full." But Sarah stopped him with a gentle touch. She saw what Emily saw, the same vulnerability Max had once carried, the same desperate hope. And so, Charlie stayed. At first, the little pup clung to Emily, following her from room to room. He was timid, flinching at sudden sounds and retreating whenever the cats crossed his path. But Max, old, slow, yet endlessly patient, noticed. On Charlie's first night, when the pup whimpered in his blanket, it was Max who rose from his bed. He padded slowly across the room and settled beside the puppy, pressing his warm body close. Charlie stopped crying almost instantly, burying his nose in Max's fur. From that moment, a new chapter began. The Thompsons watched in awe as Max, once the student, later the teacher, now the elder, took Charlie under his wing. It wasn't easy. Max's legs no longer allowed him to chase and play the way he once had, but he taught in other ways. With patience, with presence, with love, he showed Charlie where the food bowls were, nudging him forward when fear held him back. He let the pup chew gently on his ears without complaint, just as Oliver had once done to him. He even tolerated Charlie curling against him at night, though space on his bed grew tighter by the week. What surprised everyone most was how the cats responded. They could have rejected Charlie, seeing him as too clumsy, too loud, too dog. But instead, they watched Max's example. If Max accepted Charlie, then so would they. Slowly, they began to draw closer. Shadow swatted gently at Charlie's tail one afternoon, not in anger but in invitation. Luna groomed his ears when he curled up near her. Even Whiskers, the most aloof of the trio, allowed the puppy to nap at his side. And Oliver? He became Charlie's playful mentor, just as Max had been his. The Thompsons often marveled at the sight. Max lying peacefully in the sun, Oliver batting a ball of yarn across the floor, and Charlie bounding after it, his awkward puppy paws slipping on the hardwood. The circle of love had widened once more. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Sarah sat on the couch with a mug of tea, watching the scene unfold. Max was curled on the rug, Charlie tucked firmly against him. Oliver perched nearby, eyes half-lidded in contentment. The older cats sat above them on the back of the couch, their tails draped like banners of unity. Mark joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "It's happening again," he murmured. Sarah smiled, tears brimming. "Yes, it's happening again." Max was slower now, his time more precious, but he had given the family something no one could measure, a living legacy. His lessons had seeped into every corner of the house, into every paw and whisker. Even as age wore down his body, his spirit continued to build, teaching, guiding, reminding them all that family was not about sameness, but about choice. And one spring morning, long after the snow melted, Max passed quietly in his sleep. The Thompsons mourned deeply. Emily wept into her pillow. Jake retreated to his room. And even the cats wandered restlessly, searching for the friend who had always been there. Oliver refused to leave Max's bed for days, curling into the space where his mentor once lay. But grief, though heavy, did not shatter them. Instead, it bound them closer, for in every corner of the house, Max's presence remained. He lived in the way Oliver now cared for Charlie, in the way the cats accepted the new pup without hesitation, in the way Sarah whispered, "Family like no other," each night before bed. Charlie, too young to fully understand, still carried Max's lessons in his heart. He grew into a loyal, joyful dog, guided not just by Emily, but by the silent inheritance Max had left behind. Years later, when neighbors and visitors came to see the unusual household dogs and cats entwined in a bond that defied nature, it was Charlie who greeted them at the door. He stood proudly, Oliver at his side, while the cats lounged nearby as if to say, "This is who we are. This is what love can do." And in the corner of the living room, framed above the fireplace, was a photograph of Max. His ears were tilted just so, his eyes bright with warmth. Oliver the kitten tucked into his side. Beneath the frame, a simple engraving read, "He taught us love without boundaries." The Thompsons never forgot him. They never wanted to. Because in every wagging tail, every soft purr, every shared nap between species who should have been enemies, Max lived on. And so the story came full circle. Once he had been a dog who thought he was a cat. Later, he became a cat who taught a dog how to love. And in the end, he was something greater than either. He was the heart that tied them all together. A family like no other. Forever.